Hi, I'm Joseph Phillips, the Director of Education at Instructing.com, where I teach all things project management. In this series of videos, we're talking about value. Value, of course, is the reason why an organization takes on the endeavor, why the organization is doing a project. So in previous videos, we talked about the idea of value, initiating the project with value in mind. And now let's talk about planning. Planning in a predictive project is we are trying to predict everything that's going to happen from the start until we're done. We're trying to plan for how will we get to the end of the project? How will we achieve value? So in planning, we have lots of different knowledge areas to plan for. The depth of planning is relative to the size of the project. So if we're building a new warehouse, that's going to take a lot of planning. If we are rolling out a new piece of software, that could take a lot of planning. If we are painting a house, probably not going to need a whole lot of planning. If we're doing more of a micro project where it might take 2 or 3 weeks, probably our planning is pretty shallow. So the bigger the project, the more planning you're going to need. Everything's in proportion. Where I see a lot of project managers make a mistake is they get burdened with planning. They get bogged down in planning. And they have a tendency to kind of get this planning analysis that we don't really do anything, we're just planning and planning and planning. Well, while we need in a predictive project a fair amount of upfront planning, you really can't know everything that's going to happen in a project until it happens. You can't really predict that a particular employee is going to get sick on a particular day, or a vendor's going to be late, or the weather is going to be disastrous, or whatever the case may be. So planning is often a guess. It's our most likely perspective of what we think is going to happen based on what we've experienced in the past, based on our team's experience or subject matter experts' opinion, but you really don't know what's going to happen until it happens. You don't know how long the project's going to take until you're done. You don't know how much it's going to cost until you're done. So we do planning with the understanding that this is how we're going to get there and what we believe is going to happen based on this foundation of facts or experience or past behaviors. But of course, past experiences don't always predict future results. So we have to always go into planning with an understanding that this is our most likely, our best guess of what we think is going to happen. If we've never done a project like this before, and all projects are different, but we can succumb to what's called the first time, first use penalty. So it's the first time you try a new piece of software or a new material that you're working with or a new way of doing an activity that it's probably going to cost more and take longer than you anticipate, with a very pessimistic point of view there. The first time, first use penalty is that the time and the cost are probably greater than what you believe. So if we've never done this type of work before, we've never worked with this particular material, then that penalty is the time and the cost to learn it, to experiment with it, to actually implement it, because we don't have a lot of confidence in what we're doing if we've never done it before. It's like the first guy to eat an oyster. You know, it might be good, it might not, but somebody's got to go first. So the first time, first use penalty. Now in planning, we're always planning on how to achieve value, the business value of our project. So when we think about planning, we obviously think about scope, the reason why we're doing the project and what the project aims to achieve. The scope is all of our required work, but only the required work to satisfy the project objectives. So we will build the house We will put the flooring down, these cabinets, this is the electrical and plumbing will be up to code, the air conditioning, the different mechanicals, but we're not providing the appliances. This house does not come with a refrigerator and the washer and dryer and a TV and so on. That is out of scope. So our scope is all of the required work, but only the required work to satisfy the objectives, to satisfy value. Our scope statement should define our high-level objectives, our high-level requirements of what we are aiming to accomplish, but it should also define what may be some assumptions as to things that are out of scope. So you may have assumptions as the homeowner that you're going to get the appliances, but the builder has assumptions we never include appliances. And that's fine if we agree upon that up front. We don't want to get deep into the project and now these assumptions are creating an issue where the homeowner and the builder in this instance have a conflict over what's actually included. So we have our scope, all the required work to satisfy our value, to achieve the value. Then we have time and cost. These are always a sticking point in any project. So the time is how long is this going to take? As a general rule, the longer a project takes, the more expensive that project is going to be to the organization. The biggest expense in long projects is most often labor. Now I know that may not always be the case. You've got to buy materials or build the skyscraper or whatever the case may be. But the labor, you have to pay for the employee's time. But you don't, your project may not, but the organization as a whole. So the longer a project takes, they have to continue to pay for that labor. That is a direct cost of doing the project. That labor cost is assigned to the value of the project. The other side of that coin, and what probably most of us experience in a project, is where labor is considered an indirect cost, where this is the cost of doing the project and the organization is paying for this labor whether the project happens or not. So if they weren't working on your project, they'd probably be working in operations or some other project. That's kind of a big issue. Is it a direct or indirect cost, the cost of labor? My point being that someone is paying for the employee's time, whether that comes out of the project budget or the organizational budget. The longer the project takes, we have to continue to pay for this labor in the project. When the team is working on this project, they obviously aren't working on other things. When they're not working on this project, perhaps they bounce to other projects, whether I can go from project A to B to C, or I go back to operational. So I have many tasks as an employee. But the time that's allotted for that employee on this project is, from an organization's point of view, that is a cost of achieving that project. Other costs that we have in a project, obviously we have materials, so equipment and resources, physical materials. If you are working with contractors or vendors, there's going to be expenses there. So there's all sorts of costs. Any type of facilities or equipment or materials, someone has to pay for that. In a predictive project, like building a house, someone has to pay for the material, for the wood, for the plumbing, the pipes, the electrical wires, the tile floor or carpet, the paint, and so on. So that expense is part of building the project. While we're paying for these materials, for these resources, for the cost of the project, I don't get any value from that until the project is done. So if I hire you to build a house for me, and it's going to cost $800,000 for this home, the cost of paying you the $800,000, I don't really get any value from that until the home is done and I can move in. So if there's waste of materials, if people are injured on the job and the job site shuts down, or maybe we can't get the materials due to supply and demand or supply chain issues, that value of the project is threatened from my point of view, that now I have more anxiety, I'm upset, I'm not happy that these things have happened that are driving cost or are a delay from me achieving the value. Where this becomes a more significant issue is when I'm working on a project and the thing that I'm creating, the organization doesn't get value from it, a return on investment, until the project is done. So the longer this project takes, the cost of that project goes up because we're paying for the employees' time, their labor, and the materials and so on. But it also pushes out the opportunity for the organization to recoup the cost of this labor and materials and to eventually get to a profit margin, to get past the management horizon, to have a realization that there is a value, a return on investment in what's been created. So I got off on a little tangent there, but that's cost. And then of course time and cost are related. We think about how long will this project take place, but this is also the coordination of activities and the coordination of the resources involved. So coordination of activities, you think about just like building a house, the permitting, the foundation, the actual framing of the structure, the interior, the exterior, and so on. There's lots of overlap between these different activities or phases in that particular project to build that house. So the timing of this is we don't say, okay, we're going to do all of this activity and then the next activity can start. We're not going to say we're going to do all the electrical and then you can start doing the framing. Well, it just doesn't work that way, right? Because the framing and the electrical are intertwined. Same with the plumbing. So in your projects, I'm sure you have these instances where you have these interrelationships between different activities and different resources, and it becomes very complex. The complexity introduces risk. So we'll talk about risk in one moment. But with our schedule, we have the coordination of these resources, the coordination of activities to move the project forward in that phase or series of phases, or ultimately the project as a whole. So that is our schedule. And then we plan for quality. That quality, we have to plan for, well, what constitutes quality? How do we assure that quality happens in the project? QA, prevention driven. And then how do we inspect for quality? QC, quality control. So we have quality planning, that what is quality is kind of an esoteric topic. We need specific measurements, specific KPIs for what constitutes quality with what we're creating in the project. And then QA and QC, prevention driven and inspection driven. And then we have resource planning. Well, resource planning, we obviously think about materials and equipment and supplies or facilities, but also people. So it goes back to our time and cost. So this is all integrated with all of these different knowledge areas. So resource planning. And then we have communications planning. The bigger the project, the more planning you need. The bigger the project, the more communications you're going to have. So communications planning, we think about who needs what information, when do they need it, what's the best modality, how do we secure and archive that information so we can look up that information quickly, what are the approved technologies, texting, phone calls, emails, fax machines, whatever's appropriate for where you work. So we have communication planning. Then we get into risk, all right? So risk can be a really big topic, and I'll do a video coming up on risk. But risk is an uncertain event. We don't know if it's going to happen or not. So risk is an uncertain event that can have a positive or negative effect on our project. So risk is something that we usually think about, it threatens our project. But risk could also have a positive outcome. So for example, if we are going to invest monies into this project, we expect to get a return on that investment. So we're going to earn the cost of the project, and then we begin to be profitable on the project. It's uncertain. We don't know if we're going to get an ROI or not. Just like you invest in the stock market, you don't know if you're going to get a return on investment or not. Risk could have a positive or negative effect. Obviously, if the project is not profitable or it costs more than we anticipate, that's a negative effect. That's what we call a business risk, positive or negative. The other side of that is a pure risk. A pure risk is only a downside, things that we definitely want to avoid altogether. So someone could get injured on your project, like in construction or manufacturing or healthcare. So that is a pure risk, only a downside. So pure risk, we try to mitigate, we try to avoid. We do not want anyone to get injured or hurt on our project, injured or hurt, okay? So we don't want anyone to have an accident on the project. So safety guidelines, those are usually things to mitigate or avoid someone getting hurt on the project. At pure risk only has a downside. So we have risk planning, we have risk identification. We're always on the outlook for risk, that we look for any risk that could threaten the project's objectives, threaten the value of the project. So risk identification. Then we do some analysis. We do qualitative and quantitative analysis. Qualitative is pretty quick, at a high level. We can rate a risk on probability and impact from high, medium, low, and get kind of a risk score. It's just a quick subjective look at our risk events. Quantitative is we try to quantify the risk. We want to see what's the true probability and impact. How much will it cost, or what's the time delay? Usually a financial amount is assigned to that risk. So quantitative is what sets us up to create a contingency reserve. So if a risk event happens, we have a pool of funds that we can borrow against. So qualitative and quantitative are kind of somewhat interrelated. That qualitative qualifies the risk for more study. Quantitative is quantifying. And then we have our risk monitoring and control, our risk response planning. That's all the things that we're planning for there in risk. So risk then is related to all of our different knowledge areas that we've talked about so far. It can affect everything in the project, and we are always on the lookout for risk. Anything that threatens the value of our project can be a risk. After risk, we get into our procurement and stakeholder engagement. Last two things to talk about here. Procurement planning, if you're not buying anything, you really don't have to plan for procurement. If you are purchasing, there are probably rules and procedures that you have to go through in your organization to actually buy from a vendor. So we have procurement planning. And then stakeholder engagement, we want to identify stakeholders as early as possible. We need to understand what's our stakeholder attitude towards the project that affects how we can plan to engage with them. We want to look at our stakeholders' legitimacy and their influence, their power over the project, because that affects how we manage the project and how we interact with that stakeholder. So stakeholder planning, is really stakeholder engagement planning, happens as early as possible in the project, but like all of these knowledge areas, we're going to be coming back to it periodically. So this is all about planning that we've talked about here. So we talked about scope, time, cost, or schedule. So time and cost, and we looked at quality, resource management planning, communications planning, our risk and stakeholder engagement. The last plan that you may have is called the project integration plan. That it's a way of looking at how do all of these different moving parts work together, how are they cohesive for the project to be successful. Anything that you do in one part of the project can have an effect on the other part of the project. So for example, if I do a poor job of planning on how to build this house, that's going to affect the schedule. That can probably affect the cost, certainly could affect risk, and so on. So if I do a poor job of planning for cost, well, we're going to have a lot of unhappy stakeholders and risk and procurement and so on. So what I do in one area is integrated. It touches all of the other areas. So that is project integration management. All right, so that's a big picture of planning. And what are we planning for? Is that desired future state, how to get there, how to achieve the value. All right, thank you very much. Let me know in the comments if you like this video or what your experience has been with planning for value, or what other topics would you like to talk about. I'd be happy to create some videos just for you. If you're looking for project management training, please come by my website, instructing.com, where I teach all things project management. Keep moving forward.